It's now my pleasure to bring forward our next panel for the afternoon discussion on the synergies of ethanol and livestock production, the interdependence of the two industries, and the benefits that they share among themselves. It's my honor to also introduce our moderator for this panel, Secretary of Agriculture Bill Northey. As a fourth-generation farmer, Secretary Northey was elected as Iowa's Secretary of Agriculture first in 2006 and reelected in 2010. He certainly understands the role that renewable fuels have played in powering Iowa's economy and is a very strong supporter of ethanol and biodiesel. Secretary Northey.
Well, thank you, Lucy. Great to be with you today. Certainly thank you all for being here. Thank you for your role in the biofuels industry and agriculture in the state of Iowa. There a lot of things have changed over the last 35 years. Joe talked about ethanol back in the 70s and 80s, and a lot of the roots of ethanol is back in some of those very, very hard times when folks were looking for another market. And the focus really was on the ethanol side, the fuel side. And while we're producing a feed product as well, and we'll talk a lot more about that during this session, and that came into the market and people understood it, the focus was really on the ethanol side and the battle that had to take place in establishing that, getting that to the market, certainly the battle legislatively, the gathering some interest from some of our friends in the oil business and the retail business to be able to market the product. In some ways, the livestock side kind of took care of itself, or it found its own way. And these folks will have a little bit of maybe some history to talk about it. But when you think about it, a lot has changed. By having that distiller's grain as part of the mix out there, it's changed a lot of things. Certainly it changed the demand that we have for ethanol right now. I was just looking through some numbers. 2002. We used 1 billion bushels of corn for ethanol. We're using about 5 billion bushels of corn right now. 9 years ago. Not very long ago, actually, when you start to look at that increase. Actually, 2002, we had less than a 9 billion bushel crop. This year, we have a crop that's about 35% bigger than that, over 12 billion bushels. Thank goodness we have something to use it, right? And that actually, net disappearance, we produce about 2 billion bushels of corn equivalent off that 5 billion bushels of corn that is used. So we produce a feed product out there that is nearly as large as a corn supply that we produce in the state of Iowa. And when you start talking about it, I love talking about comparing Iowa to other states. I love especially talking about comparing Iowa to other countries. And you start to look at that supply. You hear of the concern right now in Argentina. They may slip below 1 billion bushels of corn production. We're producing a couple billion bushels of DDGs in this country. And it has obviously not just impacted the Midwest, it's impacted the world markets. We got folks all around the world wanting to have access to these great DDGs as our plants have figured out how to make them the best way that they can and offer them to the customers that can use them the best way that they can. So there's lots of places that we can go here this afternoon, lots of impact, and certainly the livestock industry in the state of Iowa, the future is very bright. In fact, it's probably one of the brightest times we've ever had. I was just down at the Cow-Calf Conference in Ottumwa over the weekend. Great group of older folks and younger folks looking forward to the cattle business. In this country right now, we're seeing a shrinking supply of cattle. But in Iowa, we're building feed yards. We can be competitive feeding cattle here as any place in the country. And it's because we have access to those DDGs and we can mix them with our other feed products that we have as well. And even the species that can't use those DDGs to the extent that our cattle business can are seeing some real significant benefits by being able to have some inclusion of that and being competitive versus other places because we have 41 ethanol plants in this state producing DDGs or distillers or some form that can be used from our turkey folks to our egg folks to our hog folks and certainly both on the dairy and the cattle feeding side. So that has created a dynamic where we're seeing growth in every single one of those industries here. In spite of the very challenging times over the last few years in the livestock business, Iowa is still the best place to grow that livestock. And now we finally have prices that are able to compensate for some of the higher prices of those feed products. So we have profitability in those livestock industries. But I'd argue that those folks that are buying feed in Iowa are generally as profitable as anybody in the industry, and sometimes more profitable than most, because they have access to feed products. Just to close in set of numbers, and then we'll have Matt come up, but set of numbers I talk about a lot. In 2002, kind of the beginning of this increase in the ethanol business, and certainly we had an increase in China's demand and other kinds of things. But in 2002, we had sales from our farms of crops and livestock of $12 billion. $6 billion of crop, $6 billion of livestock. By 2007, it was $10 billion in crop and $10 billion in livestock sales. Some due to price, some due to more production that was happening out there. By 2010, it was $24 billion total, somewhere about 11 and 13 or 12 and 12. It was a little tougher then on the livestock side. And this last year, we don't know the numbers for sure, but it's somewhere around $30 billion worth of sales from our farms in crops and livestock. Probably a little bit more on the crop side, but maybe 16, 14, maybe 17, 13. $13 billion on the livestock side versus $6 billion 9 years ago. Has ethanol been good for livestock agriculture in Iowa? I think very clearly. And it's been good for Iowa as well, because those numbers reverberate in our communities. We have a great time to be a part of agriculture, certainly a great time to be a part of the livestock business. Bring Matt Deppe up here as well. So each of you in your books have bios, and it certainly gives more of the details, but Matt is the CEO of the Iowa Cattlemen's Association. They have 9,500 member families. He grew up near Lamont in Jackson County, worked for Extension both at Iowa State and Purdue. So help me welcome Matt Deppe.
Well, thank you very much. It's certainly a pleasure to be here this afternoon and meet and have this dialogue, this discussion. And I can tell you certainly, as we talked about an organization that represents 9,500 members, let's not forget that in Iowa our culture is a little more diversified sometimes than in other states. And so as we think of that farmer, that rancher, that farmer feeder, that's our culture. And so a lot of folks that are Cattlemen Association members are also Corn Association members, soybeans, you can go on in that list. And that's really exciting. And I think that adds to the synergy that we have in front of us in the cattle business as well as the ag business here in our state. I was asked to come today to talk about those synergies. It's pretty easy representing one of our cattle associations, our cattle groups, to talk about the positive benefits that the product of distillers grains has brought to our opportunities, especially in that feedlot sector. You know, today I'm going to talk just a few bullet points, and it might not be in this order, but these are kind of some of those common interests and questions that I typically get, whether it's from a feedlot operator, a cattleman, or maybe even someone that's a consumer or in a different sector of agriculture. And so that value to cattle feeders. You heard Secretary Northey talk about it. He does a great job of talking about that value of opportunity when it comes to feeding in Iowa. From a cattle perspective, our feed grows right across the bunk in the field, and that could be corn or that could be distillers. And we're seeing a lot of other technological type advances to increase some other opportunities out there and ultimately make that feedstock a little bit cheaper, a little bit more cost-effective to feed, so we can reap some more profit at the end. And then some feeding trends in the past, and you know, maybe not the past, but more so where we're going in the future, I guess, is what I'd like to put some perspective on. How distillers has had an impact on the cost of a ration here. Most recently, I've got some information related to that. Some outlook as we think about distillers as a cattle feed in the future and also now. And then cattle industry changes due to availability and use specifically. Got to think about historic perspectives. Why do we use distillers? Well, traditionally, you harvest that corn, you put it in the bunk, you might crack it a little bit, or use it as an energy source to get those cattle growing fast and get them through that feedlot phase most effectively and efficiently as possible. And, from a distiller's standpoint, that's what we look at, distiller's grains. We look at it as a corn replacement. And, it's interesting when you think about local availability. This is a graph, a map, a Midwest map, and the red spots on that map are distilleries, ethanol plants specifically. But then the shading on the map are various counties throughout the Midwest. And you can think from this graphic can see that there's some relationship where the grain's grown in the Midwest as well as where some of those cattle are fed. Specifically in Iowa, you can see that up in the northwest part of our state, we feed quite a few cattle up there as compared to other parts of the state. But, the feeding business in Iowa it just continues to get better and better. If you averaged over the last year feedlot placements, definitely you'd see some rise in some cattle coming back to the Midwest, specifically to our state. And then we look at, the production of that feedstock. Obviously, the industry is growing and has grown significantly. Now, these graphs put into play distillers' grains, corn gluten feed, and corn gluten meal, but obviously that green bar being distillers' grains, significant portion. But what's changing a little bit, we've got some good times in agriculture and livestock specifically in the cattle markets. But let's not forget, too, that we have some input costs there. And this graph kind of represents that equity change over time, specifically over the last 4 years, from 2009 to 2012. And so it is really important that our feeders, our cow-calf and feedlot operators, think about what that input is costing from a feed standpoint. And so, again, it's really being looked at quite a bit more from a technology standpoint, not only distillers but other products as well. This is just a basic graph related to those U.S. domestic use throughout the country, put together, I believe, by Dr. Wisner of Iowa State. You can just see that steady incline in how we're using it locally and even exporting some too. Here's another important graph, though, that I think is really important as a take-home message is comparing the feed cost energy. Okay, the cost that's involved with putting that energy in the ration. And you can see here, as we go ahead and look at it, you get soy hulls, it's up there quite a bit. Corn's represented out there too. But as we look to the left part of the graph, or as I'm looking at it right here, those co-products that come out of the ethanol process definitely are valuable right now to squeak out a little bit more margin when we put those cattle through the feedlot phase. Again, and I touched on this, and I won't talk too much on this slide, but our culture related to feeding cattle in Iowa specifically, but also as we look countrywide, nationwide, corn is how we've built our feedlot industry nationally and through the state. But there are some exceptions out there. The one thing that I think we have to offer, and we're really good at as Iowa agricultural producers, is we're fairly innovative. We'll take a chance or two on some technology that will maybe push us ahead. And a lot of times we see other parts of our sectors in our industry in the livestock world kind of following along as well. Here's last year and what it represents, and the big take-home message here on the use of DDGs. You've got 22% was exported nationally, but the other two, multicolored green and blue, those are the cattle. So dairy and beef cattle. You can see that folks in the cattle business really appreciate or like to use this feed product quite a bit. So I would suggest that, if nothing else, we just talked about policy in the previous discussion, but if nothing else, and we talk about RFS or any other type of policy topics, when you talk to an Iowa producer, definitely they're going to look at it this way and see the benefit in that product as we move forward. Of course, and this slide just says, in Iowa we do use it quite a bit for feedlots. But we do, with our partnerships with Extension, and outreach with Iowa State University, lots of research related to storing that product. That's sometimes, when we look at it from a producer standpoint, from a feedlot operator, there might be times in the year where I can capture some value or lower cost, and if I could put it away for a little while, I might be able to help my feedlot operation a little bit better too. So I think that's kind of one of those upcoming technologies we need to think about as we move forward. Some outlook, and granted, this is my perspective. To me, Iowa equals accessible feed and water. Pretty logical, right? We talk a lot about energy costs and fuel costs in the country today. Think about it this way. If the corn's growing right down the road, and the ethanol plant's there too, we have a feedlot up the road, geez, we won't have to have too much fuel cost, energy cost related to getting those things together and doing the right things with them from a product and food standpoint or a product standpoint. So I call that our kernel opportunity. We've got the opportunity to take that kernel and just use it to its fullest potential. And then from a cattle perspective, I think we've got the opportunity to take whatever's left and bring it back and put it into a feedlot ration and squeak out just a little more benefit from it too. I think our producers will continue to use distillers. I think that's logical. If I said something different, I would expect you to throw things at me from the audience. But its ability to replace corn as a cost-effective energy source in feedlot diets is probably the highest priority right now in our state. I think we need to look at the possibility, and there are technological research type opportunities out there right now. The Beef Industry Council in Iowa and the Corn Board, I believe, are partnering on some research related to having higher inclusion of distillers' products within the ration and counteracting some of those excessive effects or whatnot with the feedlot cattle. And then local accessibility. Right now I think what we're seeing in the cattle industry is some high input costs. We went through the Southern Plains and had that big drought and seeing some heartache down there that not only are they still trucking in and railing in and barging in feed, but they didn't have a crop at all. Not that they produced a significant amount of their feed stuff, but it was significant enough to matter. And so what I'm hearing in the country right now is, when I've got a feedlot operator working on that 3-month contract with some co-products, the price is quite a bit higher. Why is that? There's some opportunities in the Southern Plains to barge or rail down those distillers' grains to feedlots down there. So we're seeing some of that and some of that ebb and flow going on. And I think in the cattle world we're going to see that for a few years to come too. Iowa, cheap corn and competitive nature of cattle feeding has led to several things, and these are just two of them. Optimum rations that have the highest level of grain. We want to efficiently and effectively do our job as food producers, really, when it comes down to it. And then taking that spring-born calf and getting it through the feedlot phase fairly quickly. This is probably another bullet that you'll see change a little bit. And possibly there's some opportunity in Iowa for that backgrounder to come in, that cattle grower, so to speak, so we limit the number of days in the feedlot phase and ultimately reduce the price it takes to get that steer to market. Cattle industry changes due to availability as distillers. Again, it's that corn alternative. We talked about the technology for higher inclusion rates, and I think you'll see the cattle industry and other livestock sectors too not just use distillers, but talk about other technologies with the corn plant or the soybean plant or what you might think of today, maybe not 10 years from now, alternative feed sources for our feedlot cattle to best utilize what Mother Nature has grown for us. So that's all I have, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Matt. We will hope to have a little time for questions as all the presenters get done here, but thank you, Matt. Certainly exciting time in the cattle business, and great to see so many young people down at Ottumwa and part of some of the cattle feedlot tours that have been out there as well. Craig Floss. Craig Floss is the CEO of the Iowa Corn Growers and Iowa Corn Promotion Board. Many of you know Craig from various dealings that you've worked with. Certainly the last few years, a partnership with the Iowa Corn Growers and Corn Promotion Board has created the Iowa Renewable Fuels Association. And we thank all you company members of that association and make sure that it's out there and does a great job for speaking for the industry. But we thank as well the corn growers for making sure that that happened. Obviously, there's a lot of issues on the plates of the corn growers, but one of those very important issues through the tenure of Craig as well as CEOs before has been ethanol, and making sure this can be a high maintenance kind of issue once in a while, and the corn growers have been a huge part of making that all happen. Craig grew up in Jasper County as an Iowa State grad. Spent some time at some other businesses before coming to Iowa Corn Growers, touring the world, doing other kinds of things for other companies. The rest of his bio is in your paper. Craig Floss.
Thank you very much. And thanks to all of you for participating today in the 6th IRFA Summit. This has become a really great event for us to focus on the importance of biofuels. And you've had a great lineup of speakers here today. And this also is a very important topic, I think. It's about the synergy, if you will, of the livestock and ethanol industry. I want to weave one other element into my discussion today as part of this panel. And first of all, I'll go to our mission and tell you how all of this, I believe, ties together. Here, very simply, is what our Iowa Corn Growers Association and our Iowa Corn Promotion Board live by each day. And our goal is to create opportunities for long-term Iowa corn grower profitability. Now, of course, it's focused on the corn growers, little c, little g, corn growers across the state. But let us make no mistake about this mission statement. It's not just about corn grower profitability, because we realize that without the profitability of those of our customers who we serve, there's no way we can be profitable. So what are those key segments? Well, traditionally, of course, one of the most important segments has been the livestock industry. Our beef, our pork, our poultry sectors, and our dairy sector. Very, very important. More recently, of course, we also have had we've had a lot of export opportunities, which has made us a significant player on world grain markets. And then, of course, the advent of the ethanol industry over time for the ever-increasing corn crop that we were growing. So today, I hope as I go through in the few minutes that I have with you, I can demonstrate how this mission statement relates to all three of those sectors. Thought I would start with a little graph here showing you how these markets fit together. Where is our current corn crop going? This is for Iowa specifically. In the next slide, I'll show you our national numbers. As you can see today, we have the bulk of our grain going into the ethanol sector, and you'll see the livestock sectors there to the bottom right of the pie chart. Exports are at 16%, and then you see the other processing, industrial processes, high fructose corn syrup, etc. So that's what the 2011-12 marketplace looks like for Iowa grain, Iowa corn. And then from a U.S. corn perspective, it shifts a little bit, and you can see that it's about a third of our corn goes into the ethanol dry milling industry. About a third of it is in the livestock and poultry sector. And then the remaining third is split between other industrial uses and exports. And yet another way to sort of graphically look at this, and this is very, very important here, the top green line is the corn supply. And you see that we've not only got a graph here that charts historical production, but also looks at an outlook of where we think things are headed over the next few years. And we've used the Pro Exporter Network numbers, Bill Hudson, for those of you who also utilize his services. These are statistics that we've taken from him. So the green line at the top is corn supply, and you'll notice that corn supply, there's quite a bit of white space in most cases between our total usage and corn supply, which is good. That means that we're meeting all of the market demands for our corn. We'll go clear to the bottom of the chart. The red there is feed use, and you see that that's relatively level overall. But one key factor in here, of course, and you've been hearing about it all day, it's the distillers' grains that come from the ethanol sector. A third of every one of those bushels that goes into an ethanol plant comes back as DDGs. Again, you've heard that a lot, but I don't think we talk about that enough especially when we look at a chart like this. So you'd take the distiller's grains and add that to that bottom red, those red bars, to look at true feed usage. Then also you can see the other processing in the gray bar, and then in yellow, of course, that is all of that corn that's now going for ethanol. And the top bar, of course, are exports. And what's great from an economic standpoint, I think, about this chart is there is a very admirable goal out there that suggests that perhaps if we could figure out a way to process every kernel of corn that we grow in the state of Iowa, what would that do for our economy? Look at what we've done. In the last 30 to 40 years, we've gone from probably somewhere between 25 and 30% of our corn being exported to now from Iowa, it's only 13% of our corn being exported. We figured out how to add that much more value to it here before we export anything. Now the question is, of course, aren't exports important? Absolutely, they're important. And I'll get into why that is so key. First of all, here's some numbers that you can look at specifically, comparing this most recent year as well as what we project for next year. So we had a carry-in coming into this last year of 268 million bushels, and you can see that that represents about 9% of our total crop. You can see our acres planted and harvested. A yield, we wound up with 172 bushels per acre, and our total production was 2.3 billion bushels here in Iowa. Again, these are Iowa-specific numbers. The next line down is the one I really want you to see. It's 692. What is that? 692 million bushels. That is the increase from the 2001-2002 crop year. So you heard Secretary Northey talk about how he likes to go back to 2002 and look at the numbers. Where were we then and where are we now in terms of total cash receipts? This tells a huge story right here. When people talk about there being competition for corn between food and fuel, one of the biggest parts of the argument that they regularly leave out is how much more we are producing, not only per acre, but we've also grown our total acres of production. So back in 2001-2002, we had a 1.664 billion bushel crop. And as you can see, last year we had 2.356 billion bushels. So all of that, if we go back a couple of this slide here, that growth that you see in the yellow is only possible because we've been able to increase the total supply. A message, again, that we need to repeat, I think, over and over and over again. For 2012-2013, you can see the numbers. We're looking at a little lower carry-in number based on usage, but we're also anticipating that this next year that the overall percentage of the crop will be a little higher because we had a larger than expected crop coming out of this last year. And you'll see that we expect acres to also increase slightly as well as yield. And of course, this is all dependent upon Mother Nature, but those are the trends as we see it. Now, specifically as it relates to both, I'll go into livestock as well as ethanol, and how is Iowa Corn as an organization supporting these industries. First of all, the corn industry collaboration. It's very important for us to work with Iowa Corn's traditional partners. And we do that in a lot of different ways, which I will be illustrating here in a moment. These are specific goals, again, that come from our strategic plan. Grow the markets for corn co-products, and meat in foreign countries, especially those with a rapidly growing middle class. Support the livestock and poultry industries in their legislative and regulatory initiatives where appropriate. Maintain and build demand for the livestock industry. And then finally, promote corn-fed pork, beef, eggs, and dairy to consumers. How do we do this? Well, through a number of research initiatives. Matt actually mentioned one earlier. We have had a tradition at Iowa Corn of working very closely with all of our livestock partners here in state to find ways to use distillers' grains to help. We had a major beef quality initiative a number of years ago. It's probably been 8 or 10 years ago now that helped move the beef industry forward. It's that collaboration, that partnership, I think, that makes Iowa such a strong place agriculturally. It's the working together, and research has been a very, very big part of that. Other industry collaboration efforts include, like the USMEF, a fantastic organization that represents the beef and pork and lamb sectors overseas. The big players at the USMEF, of course, are the USDA and also the national checkoffs for both pork and beef. Iowa corn, however, has the distinction of being the single largest grain contributor to the U.S. Meat Export Federation. Why? Well, for us, Iowa being the #1 pork-producing state and also the #7 cattle-producing state, we talked about that value add. The more we can process here of every kernel of corn, the better it is for us. And so for us, being a very strong supporter of U.S. red meat overseas is very, very important. Also, CSIF, the Coalition to Support Iowa's Farmers. Hopefully you've all heard about that organization. It is made up of many of Iowa's ag groups, including the pork, the beef, the dairy, the poultry, the turkey, Farm Bureau, corn, and soybeans. We all sit around the table on a regular basis. We have staff. We're figuring out how to grow communities and grow the farming population, grow neighbors, one farmer at a time, trying to help people manage the livestock industry in an appropriate manner. Again, why is Iowa Corn as a third party involved in this? Because we have a huge stake. We have a huge stake in making sure that the livestock industry in this state is successful. So we were a founding member of that group. I'm currently serving in my third year as president of that group, so that puts me very close to what's happening in the livestock industry, and I've got a stake in it, a real stake. And finally, we meet regularly with the commodity groups to talk about this food and fuel issue. A lot of things nationally have been occurring between our national groups and disparaging things said about ethanol and what it all is and what it isn't. And what we've said very clearly that from an Iowa corn perspective, the best thing that we can do is to reach out to our livestock sector and be able to figure out collaborative things that we can do here that make it work. If we can't figure it out here in Iowa, I don't think there's any way we're going to be able to figure out how to bring this industry together at the national level. And I'm really pleased to say how well we as commodity groups do in working with this whole issue. So now the link, and again, you've heard about this. This is almost obviously anticlimactic to this group, the link between livestock and the ethanol industry, and that's that co-product, DDGs. You can see here that we've heard a lot about the DDG replacement value for corn and how much of that then goes into final feed rations. It is absolutely critical that Iowa corn be supportive of DDGs, and we've helped support a lot of research to make sure we find the feed added value as well as to support exports. So here comes that third sector that I mentioned earlier that I was going to visit about. Although we're sending less corn directly from Iowa overseas as a raw grain product, we're sending more and more of our product processed overseas, which is much better for us. We've had significant investments in the U.S. Grains Council, which is one of the key organizations to help take DDGs from the U.S. marketplace and send them overseas. And you might say, well, hold it. Don't the livestock guys here in Iowa, aren't they frustrated by the work that we're doing to try to get those DDGs sent overseas? Well, I think Matt had a great chart up there. What he said was you could see the corn equivalent value of DDGs and feeding it in the rations. It's still a very, very competitive feed ingredient, meaning that we're using all the DDGs we can here. The industry is producing enough for us to export away from here, and so it's actually a win-win for both the livestock and the ethanol sectors. And ultimately, from a corn grower perspective, it works out well because both markets, both of our customer bases are being served well. So now we'll slip into a little more overall goals related to ethanol specifically. We've got some specific goals that suggest that we would like to see our corn to ethanol market grow to 20 billion gallons by 2015, while still providing corn and corn co-products to the livestock industry. We want to continue to collaborate with other groups of similar interests so that we can achieve some of the things you've heard a number of our speakers today talk about. 100% flex fuel fleet, higher blended biofuels. We need to continue to defend and expand the renewable fuel standard and also increase our ethanol infrastructure. Bottom line is growing the demand for corn and corn co-products and meat in foreign countries we believe will have a very, very beneficial effect not only to corn growers but to all the customers that we serve here in Iowa and to our overall economy. Some of our corn ethanol programs and outreach things. We've talked this morning through a number of speakers I should say, have visited with you about all the things we need to do to get the word out about what ethanol is and helping consumers understand the importance of ethanol to our economy. And here are a few things that Iowa Corn has been doing in recent years. First of all, an American Ethanol partnership between NASCAR, Growth Energy, and the National Corn Growers Association. Iowa Corn is very involved in this initiative, and it is a way to reach 80 million NASCAR fans. We're now entering into year 2. We had a great year 1, and we think that it is a program that will continue to pay good dividends over the next several years. We're soon to enter our 6th year in supporting the Iowa Corn Indy 250 out at the Iowa Speedway. What a great time for the Iowa Speedway to have been built and for IndyCar to begin using fuel grade, 100% fuel grade ethanol. It was a great marriage for us, and it's continued to be a great platform for us to not only talk about ethanol, but we've also spent a tremendous amount of time talking about the co-products, distillers' grains, the livestock industry. In fact, we've used the Iowa Corn Indy 250 as our communications platform because we have such a great broad reach with a lot of media outlets that for whatever issue is key during the course of that year, we've used that as our platform to communicate those messages. And invariably, they center around livestock and ethanol. We also, out at the Iowa Speedway, have a big emblazoned label right out on front, right on the track apron that says, "Powered by Iowa Corn Ethanol." There isn't a race that's run out, there isn't a weekend of races that are run at the Iowa Speedway now that does not contain ethanol. It's pretty phenomenal when you think about it. If you go back not all that many years ago, we were begging people to talk about ethanol. Now not only do we have IndyCars there, not only do we have NASCAR there, we've even got the other series of racing there. And what's most important about that is that race fans follow their product sponsors. We know that we are having a direct link to people where fuel matters, they understand fuel, and we're gaining acceptance for the importance of ethanol. And then finally, the Iowa Corn Cyhawk Series is one where you might say, well, that's totally different sporting events. How does that tie in? Again, it's a platform for us. For us, it's about how we reach Iowans here. If you're an Iowan and you, on game day, you are paying attention to what's going on with the Iowa State football game or the Iowa State basketball game, this gives us the opportunity to talk about all those messages, agricultural generally speaking, but just as importantly, ethanol and livestock as well. It has been a really good place for us to talk about what we do and what our corn farmers do so well here. A lot of additional ethanol education and promotions, as you can see, pump promotions. We do lots of surveying. We do dealership training to help with folks understanding how ethanol works. A lot of things with flex fuel, direct mailings, billboard campaigns. We've given away several flex fuel vehicles at various events. We have a biofuels mobile education center, which we partner with several Iowa ethanol plants on. We also work with the BYO Ethanol National Campaign. There at the bottom of this particular slide, you can see one of the billboards that we use, and we've gotten really great feedback on all of these promotional activities. So this slide, I think, sums it up very well. These are synergies of the Iowa corn market, and you see here in the middle of the slide, you've got your corn, and as you go around, corn goes into the livestock industry, corn goes for exports, and corn goes into the ethanol industry. And then as you follow around the outside from the ethanol industry, we have the co-products going into livestock ultimately going to exports, and then the other way around with ethanol, DDGs also being exported as well. It truly is a sustainable cycle and one that I think we here in Iowa can be extremely proud of creating because of what it's done for our economy. So, Iowa corn farmers will continue, we believe, to meet the growing demand for all of our marketplaces to include feed, fuel, food, and exports, and not only this year but into the foreseeable future. And with that, I thank you very much.
Certainly, as you talked to start with about profits, many of us have been farming a while now. It doesn't seem like as long as maybe what it's been. I've been farming 30 years. And as you look back over that time, the first 25 years, most of those years, net corn price was less than the cost of production. And thankfully, we had the government policy that allowed some support and all that, so we had a livestock industry as well that was dealing with low-priced corn. Over the last 5 years is the first time in history where you put years back to back where corn prices have been above the cost of production. It's a whole new world. It's a new world for us as corn growers. It's a new world for the livestock producers as well. Certainly it's an accomplishment that corn growers and a lot of other people have had a part of in making sure that that happens. Randy Ives. Randy Ives is a director of ethanol services for Gavilon Group. And many of you know probably Randy from some of his other roles in the industry. He first started in the industry in 1994, I believe it says in there, 1994, with High Plains Corporation. Has been was active in the startup of ICM as well. He is a graduate of University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Joined AGP right out of school, and now is active in the Renewable Fuels Association. And what Gavilon does in their marketing, and Randy has done over a while here, is working with ICM Marketing, United Bioenergy, U.S. Bioenergy, and Hawkeye Gold, selling DDGs. In fact, we made a trip together to Cuba, and Randy was working on selling DDGs in Cuba. Randy Ives, please.
That trip to Cuba brings a lot of good memories back. We had a lot of fun. Got to see a lot of things. Craig Floss was with us also. Made trips to Mexico with Iowa corn people. Ron Sabota from Wallace Farmers saw me just a few minutes ago from a trip we sent down to Mexico probably 9 years ago. Awesome to see what that export market's done, not because of me, but a lot of good hard work from a lot of people. My presentation, I'm going to run over a few things here, such as tell you a little bit about Gavilon, but mainly talk about the industry, where we are on exports, and then talk about some upcoming changes in the quality of some of the distillers, how it could impact where we actually market our products. And again, I've been marketing distillers for about 17 years, and I don't think I've really been marketing or selling anything. I've been educating consumers how to use a product that was becoming more and more abundant. A little bit about Gavilon here. You'll see that we're not a processing company. We're not an ethanol company. We don't have any ownership in any of the renewable fuels. We don't want to compete with our customers. Who we are is a storage grain company. We're the third largest grain company in the United States. Very few people know that. We hold grain until it's ready to be marketed, brought to the market when it's appropriate, things like that. So storage, logistics, distribution. We're a trading company based out of Omaha, Nebraska, formerly known as ConAgra Trade Group. Went private about 4 years ago. Our business model is ag and energy. You can see that with a lot of our revenues coming off the agricultural side, our energy side where we buy, store, ship crude oil. We market ethanol. We trade natural gas. We store it also. Our fertilizer group, pretty well known within the fertilizer group. And just a quick diagram about who we really think we are. Again, storage, logistics, distribution when the market's ready for it. So 25 offices around the world. We are international. A good friend of mine, some of you may know him, Ryan LeGrand, works in one of our Mexican offices down there. His sole job is to actually market distillers for Gavilon that is produced in the United States, adding value by taking it to where the market demands and asks for it. So we'll talk about that in a little bit further. On this chart, it's kind of busy. The only thing I really want to point out on this is that we've grown our total availability, and this is actually a picture of the RFS2. One of the things, when everybody looks at this tan bar as being where we are on corn starch-based ethanol production. A lot of people look at that as being, well, that's the ceiling. We're not going to grow anymore. We're not going to do anymore. You heard Craig Floss say one of the objectives is that we can go to 20 billion gallons, not stop at the 15. So really, we're talking about that being the floor, not the ceiling. And I truly believe that is an opportunity that's still coming up. But until we start to build out and start to use E15 in our vehicles, we're going to be stuck with around this 15 billion total production of ethanol, and thus creating about 40 million metric tons of distillers. And I'll talk in metric tons frequently today, is because I'd spend quite a bit of my time in the export arena today educating consumers from overseas how better to use this feed ingredient. Here's production and usage. This is from Iowa State. And you can see the little blue bars, exports. You can see some of the projections. But even though they're talking about low production, middle, and high in 2011, 2012, and again 2012, 2013, kind of plateaus. That's just about it. But you can see that the scope of what we're talking about here, yellow bar being domestic consumption, and I'll talk about that first, and then the blue being the export side. Know this as we go forward, a couple more slides. Our exports have run 20 to 25% of our total production has gone overseas for about the last 5 to 6 years, which has been pretty incredible. And that's been because of Iowa corn, Illinois corn, Minnesota corn, working diligently to help fund the sources, get the education piece going overseas, that let people know what DDGs are, how they can fit in the rations, how it can save them money, just like it saves our cattlemen, our beef guys, our poultry guys in the state of Iowa, how it saves them money in their rations. Okay? So these are all important. It's a lot of synergies, a lot of people working together. This is my look, or actually this is from Iowa State also. Matt's numbers looked a little bit different, and I'll explain to you real quick. He had exports in at 22%. I left that off this chart as I put it together. But you can see where beef dominates this, dairy is second, swine and poultry are a distant second and third, but very important parts. And this is really what the ethanol plants think this stuff goes towards. And when we, the production companies, understand we're making hamburger, we're making milk, we're producing eggs, we're putting ham, we're putting pork loins together and bacon. When we start to produce a product that can be that consistent, we consider it to be part of the food chain, which it is, distillers, then we end up doing better on our sales. We help our livestock partners become more efficient in its use of a product. There were times when 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people ignored the quality of the co-product out the back door. They just wanted someone to get rid of it. They could go away and give me a little check, Randy. I heard that so many times. It's changed. Life has changed. This is where, without a solid marketing program, without good revenues coming back, ethanol plants would have a difficult time being profitable. That's another reason why we spend so much time educating consumers how to do it. We all have to educate the production partners, the plants, to do the same thing. Here's Iowa since 07, actually since 06, just what is the percent of corn? I think it was, Matt had a chart that said that distillers, if corn was at 100, and this really is what this chart's saying, the same thing, distillers probably, he could get it bought today for 85% the price of corn day in and day out, 365 days on average, to be about right. And I agree. But there's this seasonality that comes from all these movements and the price choppiness and things like that. You can also see where the choppiness may be deviating a little bit, but as supply has grown, instead of being, let's say, 95% the price of corn 10 years ago, 8 years ago, we're down at 85% the price of corn on average. So that's a supply push. We're trying to develop more markets. That's why so much has started to go overseas. It's why it's been attractive to go overseas. And our two best partners, and I'll show you the charts in a second, Canada and Mexico. Our neighbors, North American markets, dominate where we ship this product because it's easy rail logistics. For Canada, it's easy truck logistics. Very, very, very interesting diagram of how we've grown this, the demand base for our distillers' co-product coming from our renewable fuels plants. This is one chart that we also, this happens to be one of Gavilon's chart like the last one. The thing I notice here is look what we've done versus soybean meal. Soybean meal is a protein. We know that. It's very low fat, has a very high protein, about 48 to 50%, very competitive. The industry, has outgrown distillers' production. There's more distillers produced in the United States than there is soybean meal, and by about 5 to 6 million metric tons. As we've explored ways to utilize the distillers, because of its rapid growth, we actually compete with soybean meal, a protein, when we are a mid-level protein, 25, 26 protein, 10% fat, things like that. We fit differently in most rations. Craig put up a slide that says a ton of distillers will replace 1.22 tons of corn, soybean meal, depending on the type of animal we're trying to feed. It also replaces some phosphorus. There's some sulfur issues, some salt, some other things that we do replace. So we're actually increasing. It's kind of like saying, I got a ton here, but I can just discount 1.2 tons out of the ration because of all the goodies that are in this. So we're still discovering value, and that's going to be the last part of my speech is going to be what one of those new value models kind of looks like. Why do we export? Got a little bit too much around. We'd like to get the most value we can. It is a good ingredient. Exporters, when they see it, they don't have another ingredient like this. They like it. They like going to Mason City, walking up to Walt Windland up there, and knowing that this is Walt's plant, and Walt will show them the whole plant, and he'll say, I'll ship you this unit train. I'll ship you one every month to Mexico. You'll always get my product. And they want a relationship. When we sell product overseas, it isn't sight unseen per se. They want to know us, the marketers. They want to know what plant it came from. They want to know that that person who runs the plant is passionate about giving a good quality product out there at all times. Just like some of the cattle feeders here, all the cattle feeders here in Iowa, they want to know the plant that they're buying their product from. They build a trust relationship, and those are important things. It's awful hard to start a war with somebody when we're shipping them food, okay? And that's what I like about distillers. We don't ship anything to Iran or Iraq yet, so maybe we should. We can stop a war. So the advantages for the consumers you can see there for exports overseas. Here are the numbers, the actual destinations, and on the chart you'll want to see this big red bar right here. This is China. And one of the things, the dynamics, you'll see it's much lower here, and I'll show you the numbers actually here. 2 years ago, they were at almost 3 million tons. They were 8%, importing 8% of our total production out of the United States of distillers is going to China. And if you look back just a year or so, if you go back, the most they imported was about 3,000 tons in 2007. And back in 2005, it was unheard of. 2006, they took in 200 tons. Took in 8 semi-trucks. That was it in 2006, and they went up to 3 million tons. It was awesome, almost 3 million tons. Now, they slapped us with a anti-dumping case earlier this year. I've had the privilege of actually being over there and testifying at a hearing over there for U.S. Grains Council for distillers to try and debunk the fact that we actually are selling it below our cost of production. We're not. But it was probably done as a measure for something we did. Something about wind towers and turbines and things like that we were importing, and we thought they were selling them too cheap here. I'm not sure. It could have been tires. We have a lot of cases going back and forth. So long story short, it should have been solved by December 28th, just a few days ago. They deferred the decision. That was after 1 year. They deferred the decision out until late June. I personally think that they will not enforce any of the dumping things. They may slap a small tariff on it, but if you think about what a 5 or 10% tariff does, considering all the other costs it takes to get there, it will not be a market-hindering action. They need stuff to feed their people, whether it's our corn, our soybeans, our distillers, our corn gluten meal, all those things in a growing population base that has a restricted ag base. I think it'd be a little premature to think that it'd be smart on their part to discount 1 or 2 of those items. So from their commodity mix. So those kind of the outcome. We're excited about what's happened. We think that market can grow even more rapidly. Here you can see their feed growth in China. How over the last 3 years it's grown every year, month over month, year over year. So this is our exports of distillers. You can see our neighbor to the south, Mexico, 1.6 million tons. We should hit 7.7 million tons this year. It'll be down, but it has to be down because our friends in China are down by 46%. That's what the brackets in red are. Their year-over-year usage has declined on distillers, but they're still at 1.3 million tons with one more month of record keeping to be announced. Canada, down a little bit. Some of the times prices don't always work to our advantage. This is one of those moments. They had a good barley crop up there. It kind of kicked out some distillers' usage. Other areas, though, you can see with Japan, up 44%. Those happen to be the top 7. I think there's 44 countries we export distillers to, most of it by container, some of it by bulk. So, and speaking of containers, those are over on the right-hand side. There's a train of them. There's also a ship. That's a picture I took not too long ago at the Panama Canal. We load by barge and thus into ship for bulk shipment, both my company and the industry. The containers are the coolest things that ever happened to exporting. We can export IP corn, we can IP specialty beans, we can IP distillers from one plant. We have plants in Illinois that ship everything they make in a box overseas, and it's 25 tons. I always call it a 25-ton sample, but they'll ship 30,000 tons a month headed overseas because the availability of cheap backhaul freight in those containers. To me, the containers, truly the statement about them is it's the box that changed the world. It allows me to get a computer for next to nothing. Didn't have to travel in the hold of a big ship. It came in a box that's easily transportable, put onto either a rail car or a truck, and we'd run. Well, the same thing happens when we send them back. We don't send them back empty to Asia or into Europe or into South America. We send them back with agricultural goods most of the time, or scrap metal, things like that. So it's pretty cool. Here's the change that I see coming up. This is the traditional model that we know for production. We are starting to install centrifuges here. We're starting to pull corn oil off, and this is probably the meat and potatoes of what I'm going to get at. And they just gave me the sign to shut up. The value added, okay, and here's why it's important. We're going to be making, and we already are selling corn oil. I'm going to flip through some of this stuff, but it's going to create a different looking distiller. Some of the oil is going to be removed, okay? Why do it? There's about 2 pounds of oil in every 56 pounds of what we call a bushel, and if we can take about a fourth of that off, we can do this profitably and not alter too much what the outcome is on the distillers. It is going to change, though, what and how distillers should be used and valued. So that's probably the biggest argument and discussion that I want to get to. Out of about 200 plants running out there, I think by summer over 105 of these dry mills will be doing this. It's a big deal. 60% of our distillers will be low oil by summer this time. Why do it? Because I can sell the corn oil for 35 cents, and my distillers today in dry mode is somewhere around 9 cents a pound. Difference of 35 cents a pound, 9 cents a pound. It makes sense to add value and make those plants more sustainable as they create more jobs also doing this. What is the argument? Running argument, though, is what does it do to the distillers? We have a ton of nutritionists looking at this. Minnesota, Iowa State, Nebraska, University of Nebraska, all the land-grant colleges, Illinois, all have looking at it from a poultry viewpoint, from a swine viewpoint, from a beef viewpoint, from a dairy viewpoint. And some of the things that we've seen as I start to close, and I'll leave those up for a second, is that that 85% that Matt mentioned that he could buy, the value of distillers in a ration might be worth more than that. Specifically, it probably is for beef. For dairy, it's probably closer to 100%. Swine is worth about 100% value. I'm talking about value, not price. Okay? And poultry, it's down here. So poultry can't use distillers as well as a ruminant animal. Okay? Because of the fiber. And now, as I start to take out the crude oil, what does that change on the distillers? Energy is what we're taking out. I listen to some people that will tell me that it's like, well, if you take a fourth of the corn oil out, it's like giving me a car with 3 tires on it. I have to go buy the fourth one to replace that energy you took out. I've got to put the 4th tire on. And there's a lot of studies going on that say that's not quite how it's going to turn out. So we've yet to see, with 60% of the people pulling corn oil out, we've yet to see the markets react in a negative fashion, discounting the product. On beef, you pull out the corn oil, they really like the energy the most of all the animal types, but it allows them to feed more. They have less tummy troubles if at the higher inclusion rates. And remember, this is 85%. The price of corn is what Matt indicated that it was worth, that he could buy it for. So he's still buying it cheaper, than corn. That's his next energy source. Dairy, they need the oil out. That gives them milk fat issues. It's the swine and the poultry where the big discussion is going on right now. And we do a lot of studies underway, and I'm going to stop right there and open it up for questions after Mr. Northey's done.
Thank you, Randy. I think we have a time for a question or two as you